Welcome, friends. Now, before the story starts, please remember to hit like, subscribe, and share a comment telling us your location and the current hour. This helps the platform to keep suggesting you tales of this kind. So now, let the quiet begin to descend. When I first took possession of this flat, I believed I'd finally achieved my goal. Eventually secured a refuge that was exclusively mine. I'd endured housemates throughout my adult existence, and I was entirely finished. Finished with the remnants of others' meals, the sounds of others' lives, and the burdens of others' crises. Half a year of absolute quiet. That was my single desire. The complex itself offered little to admire. 3 levels, pallet siding bleached under the unrelenting Colorado sun, metallic banisters flaked with corrosion. The structure of the building formed a massive letter U around a gravel lot that barely contained every resident's vehicle. Within, the corridors carried a stale trace of dust and well-done cabbage from some neighboring kitchen. The utility room was situated in the basement, and the unsteady neon fixtures down there made it resemble a setting from a vintage slasher film. Nevertheless, it was affordable, and it was mine. My unit was 6A on the middle level, directly across from 6B. I encountered the man from 6B on my second day. I was hauling a carton of glassware up the cramped staircase when I saw him coming down from the highest level. He halted midway, forcing me to halt as well. He appeared aged, nearing his late 50s, possessing pale, sickly complexion and sparse hair swept into a side configuration that hardly concealed the balding spots. His lenses were heavy enough to distort his eyes, making them seem abnormally large. We simply paused there momentarily before I initiated. "Hello, how are you today?" He inclined his skull slightly, eyes fixed. "I've been observing your arrival." His manner wasn't welcoming. It wasn't inquiring. It was definitive, as if he were stating it had been raining earlier. I offered a nervous chuckle. "Yes, I'm nearly settled." I moved sideways to bypass him, but he remained stationary for a moment. Only following a silence did he adjust just enough for me to slip past, his gaze still following me as I went. I rationalized that he was probably just socially inept. Plenty of individuals were. During that initial week, I began to perceive him far more frequently. Every time I departed from my job or returned home, he was out in the hall, resting against the railing, lingering in his doorway, or seated upon the stairs, always scrutinizing, seldom speaking. On one occasion, I returned from procuring groceries and discovered him perched on the highest step, forearms resting on his knees, vision locked on my entrance. "Good evening," I managed, fumbling with bags. He simply stared at me until I inserted my key and stepped inside. The first genuinely unsettling incident transpired about 1 week afterward. It was near midnight when I returned home from my shift at the diner. The hallway was poorly lit. One of the ceiling lamps had failed, and the remaining one was flickering erratically. As I reached the second floor, I observed his entrance was ajar a couple of inches. The interior of his space was utterly dark, but I could distinguish him standing there, absolutely motionless, facing my direction. "Have a quiet night," I mumbled, operating the lock on my own entrance. He didn't respond. I reassured myself it was merely odd neighboring conduct. Nothing significant. Then, 2 weeks in, it commenced. It was roughly 2 o'clock in the early morning. I was resting in my bed scrolling through my telephone when I heard 3 deliberate strikes on my sleeping room partition. My mattress was situated against the surface we shared. I froze, listening intently. 30 seconds later, tap, tap, tap. My curiosity overcame my caution. I tapped once in return. There was a pause. Then 3 return taps. Perfectly measured. It recurred again the subsequent evening, and the evening following that. Sometimes it was rhythmical tapping, sometimes faint abrasion, like fingernails drawn deliberately across drywall texture. Always between 1 and 3 in the morning. The first moment I detected hushed speech, I knew this was no simple prank. It was a Tuesday. I had just begun to drift into sleep when I perceived a low masculine tone through the barrier, too obscure to decipher every syllable. But I clearly caught. "She is sleeping now. Just wait." I didn't stir, didn't inhale. Every fiber in my musculature grew tense. The following morning, I rapped on his door. No answer came, but I thought I sensed movement behind the slats. Then came the dropped items. Initially, a single glass orb placed precisely in the middle of my welcome mat. A few days later, a completely spent wick. The next 7 days, a snapshot print of the building taken from the asphalt lot. No message, no justification. I didn't even possess a Polaroid camera myself. In early December, I stayed over at a friend's residence for the night. When I returned home the next morning, my original doormat was missing. In its stead was a heavy rubber pad that proclaimed, "I've been expecting you." Inside, all seemed unremarkable, until I noticed my bedroom window fastener was slit open. I never adjust that window, and I never leave it unsecured. That's when I placed a call to the authorities. 2 officers arrived, took my report, and proceeded to question him. I waited in my doorway, listening to the muted voices. After several minutes, they came back out. Dennis, that's what his mail compartment indicated, claimed he hadn't been present for several days and knew nothing about the mat or the window. Without concrete evidence of unauthorized entry, they couldn't initiate legal action. I purchased supplemental deadbolts, a floor brace, and a small surveillance device for my sitting room. Everything quieted down for a couple of weeks. I nearly persuaded myself it was concluded. Then I saw him at the food store. I was in the breakfast cereal aisle when I noticed him at the far boundary, peering around the shelving. When I glanced up, he didn't recoil, just maintained his stare. I retrieved what I required, settled the bill, and proceeded to my vehicle. He was leaning against the cart collection point. "Cold outside," he observed as I walked by. "Indeed," I mumbled, unlocking my car. The subsequent morning, there was another Polaroid outside my apartment. This one displayed me in the grocery parking area walking toward my vehicle. A few days later, I was doing laundry in the basement when the light fixtures flickered and cut out for several moments. When they reignited, Dennis was standing in the entryway. "You should secure your entrance upstairs," he uttered monotonously. "I always do." I lied immediately. He smiled faintly. "Not constantly," then walked away casually. By February, I was leaving my screen on all night long. One Thursday, I returned from my workplace, tossed my metal keys on the coffee table, and froze still. Resting in the center was a Polaroid of me sleeping in my bed. I immediately accessed the camera playback. At 9:12 a.m., my entrance door opened smoothly. Dennis stepped inside like he performed it 100 previous times. He proceeded into my sleeping area, stood over me for approximately 5 minutes, then retreated slowly. Before exiting, he carefully placed the image on the tabletop. I dialed 911 right away. The police arrived, examined the visual proof, and apprehended him that same evening. They discovered dozens of Polaroid shots inside his apartment. Me preparing food, me tending my teeth, me in the bath area through the rising steam. He possessed a key taken from the previous occupant, a woman who had broken her rental agreement after logging multiple complaints. He was charged with trespassing and aggressive pursuit. I evacuated within the same week. And even currently in a different town, I awaken convinced someone is lurking in the darkness, observing my breathing pattern. I had recently relocated to Asheville, North Carolina, in the final days of September, seeking a new beginning following a devastating separation and a position that left me feeling like a phantom in my own existence. I secured a modest single-bedroom residence on the city's periphery, the type of dwelling that appeared far superior in the digital advertisements than in person. The flooring was worn thin, the color peeling, and the entrance passage held a faint odor of stale moisture, despite the landlord's consistent assurances he had resolved the issue. But it was inexpensive, silent, and convenient to my new employment at a local bookshop. The initial couple of weeks were uneventful and slow. I worked. I returned home. I prepared simple meals. And I read until sleep claimed me. I didn't socialize with any of my neighbors apart from the man directly across from my unit, a middle-aged man named Doug, who wore tattered baseball caps and always smelled faintly of tobacco smoke. We'd exchanged brief nods in the corridor, but never spoke at length. The complex was small, with only 8 living spaces total, and most of the renters kept completely to themselves. That first Friday night in early October, I arrived from work around 9:30 p.m., arms burdened with bags of provisions. My keys were held between my teeth as I struggled to manipulate the lock. And that is when I became aware of something unusual. My apartment entrance was slightly ajar, just barely, just enough that the deadbolt wasn't fastened. I froze instantly. I was certain I had secured it that morning. Pushing it further ajar, I stood in the entry for an extended moment, listening carefully. The space looked normal upon my first inspection. My reading material was still on the shelf. The television was situated properly. The cooking area light buzzing softly. But there was a subtle alteration in the atmosphere, like the lingering scent of an unfamiliar cologne, faintly present. I set the provisions down on the counter, seized the heaviest item nearby, a heavy iron pan, and proceeded slowly through every room. Nothing. No one concealed in the wardrobe. No evidence of forced entry. Nothing missing at all. I reasoned that perhaps I had hurried out earlier and simply failed to secure the lock. Still, I engaged the double locks before retiring that very night. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a gentle creaking noise in the main room. At first, I assumed it was the structure settling, but then I detected the softest drag of someone's footsteps. My airway constricted. I sat upright, heart pounding hard, and strained to hear the silence. Then, almost imperceptibly, I detected respiration. Slow, steady, not my own breath. I reached for my telephone on the small table, but before I could even place the call, I heard the noise of my front door latch clicking securely. The intruder had just departed. I did not sleep for the remaining duration of the night. The following morning, I examined the door and found the locking mechanism perfectly intact. No visible scrape marks, no damage, no trace of interference. I considered contacting the authorities, but what could I possibly report? I believe someone entered my residence, but I cannot confirm it. And nothing was stolen from me. They would likely advise me to replace the locks, which I undertook immediately. I visited the hardware vendor, acquired a new deadbolt assembly, and secured it myself. For about 1 week, nothing further happened. I tried to convince myself I had simply imagined the events, perhaps a nightmare merging into awareness in the deep middle of the night, until one evening, I arrived home to find a small, precisely folded slip of paper inserted under my door. It was blank entirely, completely blank. I retrieved it, inverted it, even held it up to the overhead light to discern if something had been written and subsequently erased. Nothing, but the paper felt frigid to my touch, like it had just been brought in from the chill autumn weather. That night, I woke again around 2 in the morning. The apartment felt still. No creaks, no footsteps, but something felt inherently wrong within it. My bedroom door, which I routinely shut before sleeping, was slightly separated. I could discern the dim glow from the street illumination outside spilling through the narrow space. I mentally commanded myself not to rise, not to provide the individual with the response they desired, but my pulse hammered violently in my throat, and every nerve in my physique was urging me to move. I slid off the bed as softly as was feasible, picked up the frying pan once more, and moved toward the entrance. As I stepped into the hallway space, my bare foot landed on something smooth and flat. I crouched down low, heart pounding rapidly, and found yet another slip of paper. This one was not unwritten. It had 3 short words, penned in clear block lettering. I like watching. I didn't rest at all after discovering that. I remained seated on the sofa with every illumination in the unit switched on, skillet in my lap, and my phone poised to dial 911, but no one approached the door. The following morning, I went directly to confront the landlord. I informed him someone was gaining access to my private space. He emitted a heavy sigh like I was overreacting and maintained it was utterly impossible. The locks are adequate. No master key exists except mine, and I haven't entered your flat, he insisted firmly. When I demanded to know if any previous tenants had submitted complaints, he just shrugged and mumbled vaguely about people perceiving noises in older buildings sometimes. I departed feeling significantly more uneasy than before. 2 evenings later, I was in my bed when I detected a distinct sound that chilled my blood completely. The click of my front door being unlocked. Not forced open, not kicked open, just simply unlocking. I grabbed my mobile phone, whispered to 911 that an intruder was in my apartment, and the emergency operator instructed me to remain quiet and keep holding the line. My bedroom door creaked open agonizingly slowly. I could clearly see a dark shape in the blackness, tall, slender, wearing a hooded jacket. He did not utter a single syllable. He simply stood there. I attempted to shriek, but my vocal cords failed in my throat. The dispatcher repeatedly asked if I was secure, and I couldn't even manage to respond. The man took one slow, deliberate step closer to me. That single action triggered something within my mind. I grabbed the heavy pan from next to my bed and swung it with all my available force. He immediately dodged back, and I bolted past him quickly, sprinting out into the main corridor. I ran straight to Doug's apartment and hammered on the door repeatedly until he opened it, groggy-eyed and profoundly confused. He swiftly pulled me inside just as the man stepped out of my apartment and into the hall. Doug shouted loudly at him, but the intruder merely turned and walked down the hallway path toward the stairwell. No haste, no visible panic, just casual movements like he'd fully executed his original objective. By the time the police finally showed up, he was gone. They systematically searched the entire building, but found absolutely nothing. No forced point of entry. No signs of him inside my unit, except for one single item. Another piece of white paper resting on my pillow. This one had 5 new words. Next time you will not escape. I didn't reside there long enough to verify if he intended to fulfill it. I moved out the very next day. But sometimes when I'm completely alone at night in my new dwelling, I still recall the manner in which he stood there in the heavy darkness, patient, utterly silent, like he'd been entering my apartment 100 previous times. And most disturbingly of all, he never once knocked before entering. I had been occupying my flat for just over 12 months when the inaugural unsettling event transpired. It was a Tuesday evening in mid-November, one of those freezing New England nights where the breeze whistles through the cracks in the ancient window frames. My building was incredibly old. Shaky floors, plumbing that hammered like someone was deliberately knocking from inside the thick masonry, and neighbors whom you could clearly hear sneezing several doors away. So initially, the slight noise failed to alarm me. It was hushed, nearly like a small creature clawing somewhere within the structure right behind my bed. I did not own any pets, so I theorized perhaps a small rodent or similar thing had accessed the loft area. I filed a mental reminder to contact the property owner the following morning and returned to browsing on my phone's screen. But the clawing sound did not cease entirely. It became slower, resembling human fingernails scraping instead of animal claws. And immediately afterward, I detected breathing. I remained there completely motionless, my mobile device still clutched in my grasp. It was extremely subtle, like an individual attempting not to be noticed, just beyond the plaster barrier. I tried to convince myself it must be one of the nearby residents. Perhaps sound traveled oddly within the construction. I elevated the volume of the television and attempted to fully ignore it, but I got very little rest that evening. The next morning, I mentioned the disturbances to my landlord, Mr. Kiading. He was aged around 67, a reserved man with a perpetually filled coffee mug in his fist and absolutely no patience for trivialities, as he categorized them. Likely vermin, he dismissed, waving his hand at me. An old structure like this one. They infiltrate anywhere easily. I will arrange an exterminator next week. Next week. That was not precisely reassuring, but I did not pursue the subject. I went to my employment, came back home, and by nightfall, the scratching had returned. However, this time, it wasn't just confined behind the sleeping area. It traversed. I could follow it from the bedroom wall to the main living area. Slow and incredibly intentional. And once more, that distinct breathing noise followed close behind. I relocated to the sofa, assuming I would watch the screen until I eventually fell asleep. But at approximately 2 a.m., I suddenly woke up to the sound of the cooking area tap dripping steadily. Except it was not dripping when I had retired earlier. And when I stood up to inspect it, the slow dripping ceased before I even arrived at the basin. This continued like that for several days. Minor, deeply unsettling occurrences that seemed purely random, yet all took place when I was completely isolated. My metal keys, which I habitually left hanging on the hook near the main entrance, were discovered resting on the kitchen countertop. One specific morning, the cabinet where I stored my breakfast cereal was left standing open when I returned from work, and twice I was absolutely certain I smelled tobacco smoke inside my unit, even though I do not smoke, and the whole building was strictly designated as non-smoking. The true breaking point arrived about 14 days later. I had been sitting in my bed reading intently when I detected it again, the slow, rhythmic scratch directly behind my headboard. This particular time, I pressed my ear against the partition, fully determined to find out precisely where the noise was originating from. That's when I heard it clearly. A male's voice, hushed and severely muted, whispering something I could not entirely comprehend. I rapidly pulled back like I had received an electric shock, my heart fiercely pounding. My initial impulse was to seize my phone and contact emergency services. But who exactly? The police department? And articulate what exactly? That I clearly heard whispering coming from inside my wall. They would undoubtedly assume I was experiencing a breakdown. I remained seated there for perhaps a full minute before my curiosity ultimately overcame my caution. I leaned in closer again, straining hard to hear. The whisper was clearer this time around. It was my actual name. That was the final straw for me. I grabbed my outer coat, wallet, and car keys quickly, and I was running out the main door in under 30 seconds flat. I didn't halt my rapid walking until I was 3 full blocks away, standing beneath the harsh buzzing street light outside a large, 24-hour operated diner. My hands were trembling uncontrollably so badly that when I attempted to message my companion Hannah to see if I could rest at her residence, I was forced to retype the entire text message 3 separate times. I slept at her place that night and recounted everything the next morning in full detail. She attempted to rationalize the situation. Perhaps it was merely a college prank. Perhaps someone in the neighboring apartment shared the same name as me. But I could distinctly perceive the deep unease in her facial expression. She firmly told me I needed to contact the police, just in case of any danger. So I did exactly that. An officer was dispatched, carefully walked through the apartment, inspected the locking mechanisms, and informed me everything appeared completely normal. He instructed if I detected anything suspicious again, I should contact them immediately. I desperately wanted to believe that was the final conclusion of the events. It absolutely was not. The following night, I triple-checked all the available locks and even firmly jammed a heavy chair under the front door handle before retiring to bed. Around 3 a.m., I woke to the distinct, unmistakable noise of someone walking inside my living room space. Slow, clearly heavy steps moving across the loudly creaky hardwood surface. I remained perfectly still and silent, barely taking a breath. The movement paused momentarily, then resumed, advancing toward the bedroom area. I slid out of the bed as silently and carefully as I could manage and seized the baseball bat I habitually kept in the far corner. My heart was ruthlessly slamming against my eardrums. The footsteps finally ceased, directly outside my bedroom door frame. I gripped the wooden bat, so hard my knuckles were throbbing with pain. Then absolutely nothing. No more footsteps, no discernible sound, just heavy silence. I do not know the exact duration I remained standing there, completely paralyzed. When I finally summoned up the courage to vigorously yank open the door, the living room was deserted. Everything looked precisely the same as when I had gone to rest. The police were called again the subsequent day, but with zero proof of forced entry and nothing reported as stolen. There was simply not much else they could realistically do. By that point, I was averaging less than 3 hours of sleep each night, instantly flinching at every minor noise. I started leaving my main TV screen on all night solely to drown out the floor creaks and quiet whispers. But 2 more nights later, I discovered the television did not offer any protection. I woke to the faint, low sound of static noise, not originating from the TV located in my bedroom, but distinctly from the living room area. When I proceeded to check on it, I froze completely in the hallway. The TV set was on, but the audio volume was rotated all the way completely down low. And sitting conspicuously in the exact middle of the coffee table was my mobile phone, except I was absolutely certain I had left it charging on my nightstand table earlier. Displayed on the phone screen was a photograph, a completely new image. It was me sleeping deeply. I instantly fled the apartment. I did not care about the current time whatsoever. I ran straight to my car and drove quickly to Hannah's place. When I informed her exactly what had occurred, she adamantly insisted I stay at her place until I could fully ascertain the situation. The following morning, we went back together simultaneously so I could gather some essential personal belongings. Everything appeared normal initially until I slowly opened the door to my main bedroom closet. In the far back, dimly lit corner, concealed entirely behind a full row of clothes hanging up, was a small, square opening cut out neatly in the plaster wall. I pulled the clothes completely aside and just stared into the void. The cutout led directly into a very dark, extremely narrow crawl space passage, and on the dirty floor of that cramped space was a thin, single mattress, a rumpled woolen blanket, several empty plastic water containers, and a half-eaten sandwich, still wrapped carefully in aluminum foil. Someone had clearly been physically residing inside my walls all along. We immediately contacted the authorities. They thoroughly searched the crawl space area and ultimately discovered a small backpack containing a few articles of clothing, a pocket lighter, and a brand new pack of cigarettes, producing the same faint smell I detected previously. But the individual who had been residing there was gone completely. The officers said they would increase routine patrols in the immediate area and strongly advised me to temporarily stay somewhere else for a brief period. I offered no disagreement. 1 week later, I returned to retrieve the rest of my remaining items. The landlord had tightly padlocked the crawl space entrance, but the entire apartment still felt dreadfully wrong. I was standing in the bedroom packing items up when I finally noticed something strange on the wall directly above where the headboard had rested. Faint, jagged scratch marks like deliberate letters carved into the paint surface. I stepped much closer and my stomach completely dropped. It was my full name, scratched repeatedly and clearly visible, etched into the plaster wall. I moved out permanently that very day. To this very day, they never successfully located the man. Sometimes when I'm lying in bed completely alone in my new residence, I swear I can hear it once again, that slow, distinct dragging scratch emanating from inside the wall. And I cannot help but deeply wonder if he's still out there somewhere actively searching for another empty wall to securely hide behind once more. It neared the hour of midnight when I finally chose to discontinue my driving for the day. I'd been operating the car since 8 a.m., striving to endure the endless Kansas expanse of my cross-continent journey. There exists a certain quality about Kansas at night that feels inherently wrong, not in any paranormal sense, just in an unnervingly vacant manner. The roadways appear unending, the small settlements are miles distant, and the surrounding silence feels far from peaceful. It feels exactly like you've been utterly forgotten by the rest of the world. I was fully drained. My lower back ached intensely, and the stimulant rush I'd been relying on since the early afternoon had subsided into a persistent, dull-pressure headache. So, when I noticed the weak neon marker for Highway Rest Inn, I did not hesitate at all. The establishment was small, housing perhaps a dozen guest rooms total, the kind of remote motel where the gravel parking area practically serves as the front garden. One noisy overhead lamp illuminated the fractured concrete, and the front reception area was a tiny glass enclosure with a solitary-aged man inside, partially watching a small television set perched on the service counter. I brought the car to a halt directly in front of the main office, exited into the mild, damp atmosphere, and retrieved my money. Inside, the elderly man lifted his gaze from his television screen. His face was deeply wrinkled, not solely from advancing age, but from a profound type of exhaustion that suggests he'd been stationed here for many decades. "Only yourself?" he inquired, his voice raspy and dry. "Yes, merely passing through," I stated, pushing my identification across the counter surface. He nodded deliberately, then moved through a collection of worn metallic key tags hanging on hooks. He selected one, paused briefly, then returned it to the hook, finally choosing a heavy brass key with a faded number 5 drawn upon it. "Unit 5, he announced flatly, sliding it toward me. As I grasped the key, I realized the key for Unit 6 was not suspended with all the other keys. The labeled hook was present, marked in flaking black letters, but it was conspicuously empty. "Is your hotel full tonight?" I asked casually, just making polite conversation. He didn't look up from the small sheet of paper he was hastily scribbling something on. "No, just keeping some rooms temporarily closed for remedial work." The way he phrased it was curt, almost as if he strongly desired me to discontinue my questioning. I acknowledged this and proceeded back outside into the night air. Unit 5 was immediately adjacent to Unit 6. As I proceeded down the row, I observed Unit 6's access door was secured completely shut with a heavy chain from the exterior. Not simply locked, there was an actual industrial-grade chain woven through the handle and firmly bolted into the door's frame. A corroded steel padlock held it securely in position. The internal blinds in the window were tightly pulled down, but the way the fabric bulged, slightly near the base, made me suspect something was pressing up against it. I quickly dismissed the thought. It wasn't as if I'd never witnessed strange motel conditions previously. Occasionally rooms are officially closed down for insect management or because of a severe plumbing catastrophe. I granted myself entry into room 5. The interior was precisely what you would expect for $40 per night. Stale, musty carpet, 2 table lamps that did not coordinate, a bedding covering patterned with abstract angular shapes that were likely intended to conceal previous stains. I threw my duffel bag onto the bed surface and sat down heavily, massaging my temples. All I desired was a hot shower and sleep immediately. The water for the shower was tepid, but it served its primary purpose. I climbed into the bed itself, flicked through the digital channels on the small television for perhaps 5 minutes before resigning myself and turning the set off. The steady low drone of the air conditioning unit was the only audible sound as I slowly drifted toward slumber. I was abruptly awakened by a sound I could not identify immediately. It was barely perceptible at first, almost like the AC apparatus was laboring, but then I became aware it was emanating from the wall. The common wall I shared with Unit 6. It was a deeply muffled noise, like an individual speaking very quietly, too softly for me to discern any actual words. I sat upright there in the darkness, trying to determine if it was a television set in the next unit, but it was significantly past 1 a.m., and I recalled that Unit 6 was reportedly not supposed to be in current use. The quiet murmuring suddenly stopped. I lay back down again. Maybe 10 minutes later, a completely different sound began. Something being dragged heavily, a low scraping noise, slow and utterly steady, like a large piece of furniture being forcefully pulled across the floorboards. Then a distinct, sharp impact, not upon my door, but directly on the shared wall. I froze completely. It came again. 2 rapid knocks, then absolute silence. My skin developed goosebumps immediately. I attempted to convince myself perhaps the owner had someone working in there late into the night, rectifying whatever maintenance issue he had previously mentioned. But at 1:20 in the morning, that reasoning seemed highly illogical. I remained awake for an additional hour, but no other event occurred. Eventually, I drifted back into a light sleep. The second evening was when the situation deteriorated significantly. I decided to remain an extra day because a violent thunderstorm was approaching the area, and I didn't want to risk driving directly through it. The storm struck forcefully that night, hard rain pounding against the window glass, and strong wind howling through the small gaps in the door frame structure. Around the stroke of midnight, I was resting in my bed scrolling through my mobile device when I detected it again. The distinct dragging noise. This particular time, it was immediately followed by a solid thud sound. Then I detected something else, a quiet whisper. I sat straight up, straining my ears to hear over the raging storm. The whisper was incredibly faint, but I was certain it was originating from the vent itself. I slid completely off the bed, crouched low near the wall, and pressed my ear close to the metal vent cover. "Help me." The voice sounded frail, clearly trembling. My blood instantly turned ice cold. I whispered back softly, "Hello? Who is in there right now?" There was absolute silence for an extended moment. Then, "Do not inform him." I recoiled sharply, staring hard at the vent as if it might provide an answer. The storm severely rattled the windows once again, and I reassured myself I must have been imagining the sounds. But before I could fully convince myself of that, a different noise emerged from Unit 6. Heavy, clearly deliberate footsteps. They stopped precisely against the partition we shared between the rooms. I didn't get any sleep that night whatsoever. The following morning, I squarely confronted the old owner. I informed him I'd heard strange noises inside the supposedly empty room, even human voices. His facial expression didn't significantly alter, but his eyes did a strange, evasive motion like he was carefully assessing exactly what to say next. Probably the storm causing the old plumbing to vibrate, he finally declared. Do not worry about the sounds. I asked him pointedly if he would officially open the room and conduct an inspection. No, he stated flatly and firmly. That was it. I retreated back to my rented room and strongly considered simply packing up my things and departing immediately, but a stubborn feeling inside me absolutely required to know the truth. So that night, I patiently waited until the office light was extinguished and the main parking area was completely still and silent. Then I stepped outside quietly, my raincoat covering my pajama clothes, and crept toward Unit 6. The padlock was still positioned there. The chain appeared weathered but was undeniably solid. I knelt down cautiously, attempting to peer through the small vertical gap in the curtain. Something inside visibly moved. I quickly staggered back, my heart pounding fiercely. The movement was minimal, like someone slowly shifting positions on the floor. I was still staring intently when I detected the softest noise behind me, a distinct footfall on the wet, concrete pavement. I spun around instantly. The owner was standing directly there, rainwater dripping slowly from the brim of his wide hat, his eyes locked firmly on my position. You should not be standing outside here, he stated quietly. Before I could offer any sort of answer, there was a loud, single bang from inside Unit 6. Something large slammed into the common wall hard enough to violently shake the heavy chain. The owner did not even flinch at the sound. He simply stepped forward deliberately, positioning himself directly between myself and the locked door. Return to your room now, he commanded sharply, and there was nothing tired or worn left in his deep voice. Now. It was delivered sharply, highly commanding. I instantly returned to my room. I do not know exactly why I didn't immediately protest, why I didn't sprint to my vehicle right at that moment, but something intense in his cold expression told me that it would not be a wise move whatsoever. I departed first thing in the next morning. 2 days later, while stopped at a local diner in the state of Missouri, I observed a brief, local news report playing on the television above the counter area. It was solely about the highway rest and location. Police had suddenly entered the property after a confirmed missing woman was identified there by a concerned passerby. She had been illegally chained inside Unit 6 for several weeks. They displayed a very blurry still image of her being let out on a medical stretcher. The owner was formally arrested for the charges of abduction, unlawful detainment, and serious assault. When the server brought my cup of fresh coffee, she noticed I was intently staring at the news report. "Did you hear about that place before now?" she inquired casually. I nodded my head slowly. "Yes," I replied quietly. "I stayed in Unit 5. I currently reside in a peaceful town in Indiana, the type of neighborhood where residents often forget their main entrances are unsecured and kind neighbors bring excess squash from their gardens during the summer season. My daughter Olivia is 8 years old. She possesses this unruly, naturally coiling hair that simply refuses to be managed, and a distinct laugh, so powerful it manages to dispel any difficult mood. I've been raising her as a single father since she reached the age of 4. Her mother relocated to a different state for career purposes, and we maintain a cordial relationship, but Olivia remains with me full-time. Most weekday mornings, I drop her off at the school facility before proceeding to my employment. It's an established routine we've perfectly mastered. Hot coffee for me, cold chocolate milk for her, and a silly guessing ritual where she attempts to predict the exact color of the first passing vehicle we'll notice on the entire drive. That's precisely why it felt so remarkable to me that specific morning in late October when she confidently guessed the color white before we'd even navigated the corner turn, because with absolute certainty, positioned across the street from the school's recreation area, there sat a white utility van. It featured no windows on the side panels, only two in the rear compartment, and the paint looked heavily weathered, quite dirty, suggesting it had been stored for many years in some derelict storage yard. At the moment, I didn't dwell much upon it. The area is publicly accessible. Individuals are permitted to park where they choose, and perhaps the vehicle belonged to an independent contractor performing work nearby. But when I retrieved her that afternoon, the same van was still present in the identical location. The subsequent morning, the same van, in the same position, and the morning immediately following that, by the fourth day. It wasn't exclusively me who was noticing. A handful of other parents in the drop-off queue were quietly expressing their concerns about it. One mother even mentioned she saw an older gentleman sitting inside the driver's seat with the engine running idly. But when she walked past the vehicle, he lowered his head as if he were deeply engrossed in reading something. I started systematically scanning the van each morning, attempting to get a clear visual of the license plates or the individual driving, but the harsh angle and the sun's glare reflecting off the glass made it exceedingly difficult. Olivia did not appear to observe it, thankfully. The last thing I desired was to introduce needless fear into her consciousness. That particular Friday, I made the deliberate choice to detour by the school during the lunch break, just to verify if the van still remained there outside the regular drop-off and student pickup periods. Sure enough, it was indeed there, this time positioned a little further down the street, but still oriented directly toward the play area. That's when a definite knot formed in my abdomen. I called the police non-emergency phone number and calmly explained the entire situation. The operator confirmed they would dispatch an available patrol car to investigate. By the time I collected Olivia later that day, the mysterious van had vanished entirely. I cautiously assumed perhaps that was the absolute end of the issue. It was not. The following Monday morning, the white van had returned. This specific time, situated closer than it had been before. I could clearly discern a human shape in the driver's position, their head angled slightly toward the schoolyard swings. I made an effort to establish eye contact as I drove slowly past, but the figure immediately turned their head down toward the dashboard panel. That same night after Olivia had been put to bed, I sat down at the wooden kitchen table with my personal computer, searching for white van near school and stranger danger reports Indiana. Nothing yielded a positive match. No official security alerts, no relevant news stories. It felt completely as if I was the only individual taking the situation seriously. I promised myself I'd maintain a safe distance, but continue to observe the activities. 2 days later, I suddenly woke up at 2:30 in the early morning hours to utilize the restroom facilities. On the return route to my sleeping area, I passed the main front window and happened to casually glance outside. Parked directly across the street from my home residence was the identical van. I instantly froze, just standing completely still there in the darkness, fixatedly staring at the vehicle. It was completely stationary. No lights were active, but I could plainly distinguish the clear silhouette of a man occupying the driver's seat position. I did not move at all, didn't even risk a single blink. After what felt like countless minutes had passed, the van slowly began to pull away. Not rapidly accelerating, just gently coasting down the street and eventually vanishing into the surrounding night. The next morning, I kept Olivia home from school and contacted the police department again immediately. An officer arrived, formally recorded my statement, and assured me they would increase patrols in the area more consistently. They also strongly advised me to thoroughly document any future sightings using photographic evidence. For a full week afterward, nothing else happened. No van sightings. No trace of the individual. Then, one particular evening, I returned home from work to discover a thick envelope securely taped to my front entrance. Inside the envelope was a single candid photograph of Olivia, taken from directly behind her as she played on the swings during recess. I felt an overwhelming urge to violently vomit. I immediately contacted the police, but they confirmed there were no usable fingerprints. No valuable evidence beyond the actual photograph itself. They only instructed me to remain highly vigilant and ensure my doors were locked. The following several days became a haze of intense hyper-awareness. Every time an automobile slowed down near our local street, my body would instantly tense up. I abruptly stopped allowing Olivia to play unsupervised outside, unless I was standing right there with her. One night around 11:45 p.m., I was already in bed when I distinctly heard a faint, repetitive tapping sound. At first, I foolishly thought it was simply a small tree branch brushing against the exterior siding. But when the tapping resumed again, clearly rhythmic and intentional, I quickly got out of bed and crept silently to the living room window. The white utility van was positioned directly in my driveway now. Before I could fully react in any way, the tapping immediately stopped, replaced by the audible sound of distinct footsteps. Heavy, clearly slow, advancing toward the front entry. My mobile device was located in my bedroom, but I did not dare sprint back quickly for it. I was desperately trying not to generate any noise. A shadow passed immediately by the frosted glass window situated beside the door frame. Whoever was present stopped abruptly, standing just mere inches away from me on the outside surface. Then, adopting the most frighteningly casual conversational tone possible, a man's voice distinctly uttered, "She closely resembles her mother." I retreated backward, so rapidly I nearly tripped completely over the coffee table. The footsteps immediately began to retreat. The van's engine started up and hummed. By the crucial time I ran to frantically grab my phone and dial 911 emergency services, it was already gone. Police arrived at the location within several minutes, but once again discovered absolutely nothing. They promised to maintain an unmarked patrol car near the house throughout the night. 2 days later, Olivia was attending a friend's scheduled birthday party situated across the other side of town. I was enjoying the rare moments of quiet when my personal phone vibrated softly with an incoming text message from an unidentified number. It was another photo. Olivia in her friend's back garden area eating birthday cake. No accompanying caption was present. I immediately contacted the party host urgently. She confirmed everything was completely fine. Olivia was right there visibly laughing with all the other invited children. But when I inquired if she'd observed anyone or anything strange nearby, her voice abruptly dropped low. "Actually, there's this white van that's been parked further down the street since the moment we started the party." I didn't wait another second. I informed her I was immediately on my way and to keep Olivia securely indoors. By the time I finally got there, the van had already disappeared. That night, I truly couldn't manage to sleep at all. I sat in the dark living room with a wooden baseball bat lying across my lap, staring intensely at the front window's glass. Around 3 a.m., I must have briefly dozed off because the sound of my phone buzzing loudly instantly jolted me awake. It was another text from the same unidentified number. This particular message contained a short video. It was me fully asleep in the chair, my mouth slightly ajar, the baseball bat still lying across my lap. The camera perspective was so extremely close I could clearly see the slow rise and fall of my chest. My stomach completely dropped as the horrific realization dawned on me clearly. He'd somehow been physically inside the house. I immediately called the police again, but upon their arrival, there was still no detectable sign of forced entry. Every single door was still securely locked, every single window latched tightly. They simply couldn't provide any explanation for the intrusion. I replaced every lock installed in the house the very next day and had comprehensive security cameras professionally installed everywhere. It's now been 3 weeks since the last confirmed sighting, but every time I hear the low sound of a van engine in the nearby distance, my heart starts fiercely pounding. I now personally escort Olivia into school every single morning promptly, and I do not depart the premises until I visually confirm her teacher takes her safely inside the building. The cameras have never successfully caught him in the act, but sometimes late at night, I wake up with the powerful, unshakable sensation that someone's intently watching me from within the surrounding dark. And I know deep down inside that this terrifying game is definitely not over yet. I've always enjoyed scavenging through consignment shops and estate liquidations. There is something deeply compelling about sifting through the abandoned remnants of other individuals' existence that has perpetually captivated me. I never purchased anything excessively unusual. Mainly old literary works, vinyl records, perhaps a small decorative item or two. But one Thursday evening, I stopped by a compact, poorly illuminated store located in the older district of the city. The specific type of venue wedged tightly between two boarded-up structures, with an inconsistently flashing neon open sign fixed in the dusty window. The small chime above the entry gave a feeble sound as I stepped inside the threshold. The combined odor of thick dust and something subtly metallic hung heavy in the stale air. The interior felt overwhelmingly confined, walkways too narrow, shelving units stacked precariously high with strange objects whose complete history you couldn't possibly imagine. In the furthest dark corner, half concealed behind a collection of malfunctioning lamps, I noticed a worn, heavily damaged cardboard carton with a hastily handwritten label secured to the front. $1 each old VHS cassettes. Something about that detail intensely drew me in. The tapes themselves were unlabeled, just stark black plastic casings with damaged, peeling stickers. I carefully lifted one up and rotated it in my hands, fully expecting to see some film title scrawled across it in black marker. But instead, there was only a number sequence, 147, penned in precise block characters. Every single tape inside the box featured a similar unique number. No descriptive titles, no explanations. I purchased 3 of the cassettes purely on sudden impulse. The man attending the counter, a haggard, bony figure with skin resembling the texture of antique paper, made no attempt at conversation. He simply slid the tapes into a thin plastic bag, his long, thin fingers brushing against mine, for a split second too prolonged before he quietly muttered my total cost. His eyes remained fixed upon me as I quickly left, and I am certain he kept staring through the shop's filthy front window until I rounded the nearest street corner. That very night, overwhelming curiosity took hold of me. I retrieved my vintage VCR unit, connected it securely into the television, and slid in the very first tape. For a brief moment, harsh static sizzled across the screen surface. Then it suddenly cleared to display a poorly illuminated basement setting. The fixed camera was positioned inconspicuously in the corner, totally static. There was a single plain wooden chair placed precisely in the center of the damp room. After a long minute or two of heavy silence, a man strode into the frame's view, tall in stature, possessing noticeably broad shoulders, wearing a thick, dark-hooded sweatshirt with the hood pulled low, deeply obscuring his face. He stood directly behind the chair as if patiently waiting for someone to arrive. Eventually, a second man was forcibly led into the shot, his hands bound tightly, his mouth covered with a gag. His terrified eyes were wide and nervously darting around like a frantic, caged creature. The hooded figure calmly placed one hand on the wooden chair's back, looked directly into the camera's lens, and declared, "Lot identifier 147. The initial bidding price starts at 5,000. It required me a few agonizing seconds to fully process the horrifying words I was hearing. The distinct voice was measured, almost unnervingly detached, but the content of the words penetrated me like a sudden shock of ice water. The hooded man then moved slightly aside, and I then fully grasped the camera wasn't just passively recording. It was actively broadcasting. I could faintly perceive muffled human voices through the pervasive static, indistinct but clearly present, shouting out various numbers in swift, continuous succession. The restrained man was visibly trembling violently, attempting desperately to shout through the confining gag. The remainder of the tape became a confused, terrifying blur of panic and intense disbelief for me personally. The bidding continued for what felt like an eternity, finally concluding with the hooded figure pronouncing a definite final number and coldly stating, "Sold." The entire screen instantly cut to black. I simply remained seated on my living room couch, my entire skin tingling with dread. My very first thought was that this entire thing had to be completely fabricated. Some disturbing, poorly executed student short film perhaps. But deep down in my gut I knew it was absolutely not. Something about the brutal authenticity, the raw, unadulterated fear reflected in that man's eyes was too genuinely real to have been merely acted out. I should have immediately ceased my investigation there, but naturally I did not. The second cassette tape was distinctly numbered 148, the identical basement location, the same hooded, anonymous figure. This time the victim was a young woman, possibly in her mid-20s, tightly secured to the chair. Her eye makeup was heavily streaked down her cheeks. Her lips were severely split open, as if she'd been viciously struck. The auction bidding proceeded more quickly this time. At one critical moment, she managed to look straight at the camera's lens and whispered something utterly inaudible. And then, for just a fleeting moment, her direct gaze seemed to subtly shift its focus, like she was staring past the camera apparatus, directly at me personally. I instantly turned off the entire television set and sat immobilized in the dark. Every single shadow present in the room suddenly felt menacingly closer. I tried desperately to disregard the events, telling myself I'd dispose of all the tapes in the morning light, but any chance of sleep evaded me easily that night. I kept obsessively thinking about that last, intense look from the young woman. The next day, when I eventually woke up, there was an unexpected fourth tape, sitting clearly on top of my VCR machine. I absolutely had not purchased a fourth tape. The identifying number written directly on the label was 149. I didn't even touch it initially. My apartment door was verified to have been securely locked. There were no detectable signs of forced entry, but somehow someone had been inside the space. My skin felt burning and prickly as I finally reluctantly picked up the tape. This time, when the intense static finally cleared, my breath completely froze in my throat. It was a live view of my own apartment space. The identical couch I was sitting upon at that exact moment, the very same coffee mug still resting on the small table, and a shot of me sleeping soundly, curled up under a simple blanket. A voice, distinctly low and disturbingly amused, spoke from directly behind the position camera. Lot identifier 149. The opening bids will commence now. I forcefully ripped the tape out, my heart violently hammering, and instantly ran straight to the police station. I reported everything to them. The creepy shop, the purchased tapes, the gaunt man behind the counter, the newly appeared tape. They formally seized the tapes as evidence, but didn't seem entirely convinced by my story. They said they would thoroughly look into the matter and advised me to stay somewhere else temporarily for a while. I crashed unexpectedly at my friend Mike's residence for a full week, intensely attempting to pretend my life was absolutely normal. But then Mike handed me a small package one morning, stating it had been deliberately left at his front door with my name clearly written on it. Inside the box was yet another cassette tape. No numerical label this time, only the single ominous word finale, written clearly in bold red ink. I truly did not want to watch the tape, but I felt compelled to know the outcome. Mike and I inserted it into the VCR together. The television screen illuminated brightly to once again show the familiar basement set, but this specific time there were multiple empty chairs, all waiting to be filled. And horrifyingly, in one of those seats was me, fully bound, gagged, my wide eyes filled with unadulterated terror. Mike violently yanked the tape out before the footage could progress any further. Both of us were severely shaking. He called the police department again immediately, and this time they treated the report much more seriously. They dispatched officers to the exact location of the shop I had described, but it was completely gone, the space utterly empty, as if the store had never even physically existed there. I subsequently moved to a completely new apartment unit across the entire city, changed my phone number, and ceased going to any thrift stores for many months. Nothing else happened until just last week, when I returned home from work. There was a single VHS tape resting on my doorstep. No numerical label, no written words, just a thin strip of masking tape with today's exact date written clearly upon it. And I now know perfectly well, I know with certainty that if I were to watch it, it would undoubtedly be my very last night alive. I first encountered Logan James when we were 8 years old. We lived 2 properties distant in a tranquil housing circle in Maplewood, Oregon. And from the very first occasion we exchanged words, we were completely inseparable. We participated in local Little League together, constructed elaborate tree forts in the dense woods behind my residence, and even managed to achieve suspension from middle school simultaneously for unintentionally activating the school's fire alarm system during a chemistry class project. Everyone within the small town recognized us as an automatic pair. If you spotted my face, you immediately saw Logan. If you spotted Logan, I was always close behind him. We genuinely were brothers in every essential sense except by actual blood relation. I am now 30, and for the vast majority of my life, I never once entertained the slightest doubt that Logan was the specific kind of confidant you could phone at 3 in the morning and know with certainty he'd be there without question. But the awful truth I discovered last year, it viciously corrupted every cherished memory, every shared chuckle, every single particle of sincere trust one ever possessed for him. This wasn't merely learning your closest friend was dishonestly dealing cards in a poker game or had lied about some minor transgression in secondary school. It was fundamentally darker. It was absolutely terrifying. And the most agonizing part is that I genuinely should have anticipated its arrival. It began with an unexpected phone call occurring in the midst of a severely rainy March night. My phone vibrated intensely on my nightstand table, and I groggily observed Logan's displayed name. I nearly ignored the call, but an inner intuition suggested it might be something profoundly serious. His natural voice sounded noticeably shaky, which was profoundly unusual because Logan never seemed frightened or distressed. He abruptly explained his large truck had suffered a sudden mechanical breakdown about 20 miles outside the city limits on Highway 47, specifically near those desolate, long-abandoned grain silos. He required my immediate assistance to come and pick him up quickly. I didn't even pause to seriously consider the request. I immediately grabbed my vehicle keys and was heading swiftly out the door. That was the core reality concerning Logan. I would have readily driven through a full-scale blizzard for him in an instant. When I arrived at the location, his massive truck was parked awkwardly on the rough gravel shoulder, the hazard lights blinking rapidly. He was leaning heavily against the engine hood, smoking a cigarette. His hoodie was pulled up tight against the driving rain. I lowered my driver's window slightly to shout over the heavy storm noise. "Are you fine?" He nodded quickly and sharply, almost too abruptly, and immediately slid into my passenger seat. His outer clothing was soaking wet, and I distinctly noticed his large hands were badly trembling, not from the external cold, but as if he had just completed running 10 miles or experienced some severe trauma. I attempted to prompt him into conversation, but he dismissed everything I asked, stating he'd provide a full explanation later and simply commanded me to drive. He then provided me with an address, not for his own dwelling, but for an isolated, old property situated on the far edge of town. It was a badly neglected, single-story residence I didn't recognize at all. There was no visible porch light, no clear signs of occupancy or life. The external siding was warped from countless years of exposure to the elements, and the windows were completely dark. "Whose location is this?" I finally asked. "Just someone I happen to know." "Thanks a lot, man. You genuinely saved me tonight," he replied, consistently avoiding all eye contact with me. He exited the car quickly, offering a brief, dismissive wave before disappearing into the dark interior. I accelerated and drove away, feeling profoundly uneasy about the encounter. Throughout the next 7 days, Logan behaved distinctly differently. He suddenly stopped replying to my text messages promptly. When we did actually spend time together, he seemed noticeably distracted, continuously checking his mobile phone or frequently glancing toward the windows. On one occasion, I clearly observed him watching a house positioned across the entire street while we were briefly parked in my car, consuming takeout food. It was far beyond casual, simple people watching behavior. He was absolutely fixated, intensely focused, like a predatory hunter patiently waiting for subtle movement. I inquired if everything was going smoothly, and he merely replied, "Yeah, man, everything's fine. You worry excessively." But I instantly knew fundamentally something was seriously wrong. I've known him intimately since we were small children. I could instantly tell when he was clearly concealing something significant. Then came the unfortunate night I made the grave error of entering his home garage. We had initially planned to work on repairing my old dirt bike, and Logan had verbally instructed me to meet him there at his house. He wasn't present when I first arrived, so I permitted myself entry through the side access door. His garage interior had always been chaotic and disorderly, but this time it appeared strangely organized and staged. There were neatly aligned rows of clearly stacked plastic storage bins along the entire wall, each meticulously labeled with descriptions such as tools, camping gear, and miscellaneous items. But one particular bin shoved deeply toward the back had no written label. I still don't fully comprehend why I impulsively opened it. Perhaps it was simple curiosity, perhaps an innate, strong instinct. Inside the bin were photographic prints, literally hundreds of them. The majority depicted various random people within the town, walking to their respective vehicles, leaving the local grocery store, or sitting comfortably inside their living rooms. Some of the photographs were obviously captured through house windows, some clearly taken without the subject's full knowledge. I hurriedly flipped through the rapidly growing stack, my stomach twisting tighter with the view of each new image. And then I shockingly saw her. It was my sister, Claire. She resides 2 towns distant and has barely even exchanged words with Logan since our high school years. The specific photo was of her making a cup of coffee in her kitchen, wearing her light pajamas. The camera angle was clearly taken from outside through the large glass window. My hands began shaking uncontrollably as I dug deeper into the enormous stack. There were numerous more photos of Claire in different daily outfits, captured on different calendar days, even one showing her asleep on the sofa. I felt profoundly nauseated. I quickly dropped the stack of prints back into the bin and hastily stepped away, frantically trying to fully comprehend the scene. That's precisely when I heard Logan's voice emanating from directly behind me. "What exactly are you doing inside here?" His tone of voice wasn't playful or familiar. It was chillingly cold, extremely calculated. I turned quickly, nervously trying to make up an excuse, but he immediately stepped closer, effectively blocking my access to the side exit door. The strange smile he offered me wasn't the friendly one I had happily grown up with. It was something significantly darker, something deeply unsettling that made my chest tighten painfully. "You've been inside here for an extended period of time," he commented, his eyes clinically scanning me like he could flawlessly read every single disturbing thought in my head. "Did you successfully find anything particularly interesting?" I stammered out some weak excuse about merely looking for the specific socket wrench, but I could clearly perceive he did not believe the lie. He walked calmly past me, securely closed the lid on the open bin, and promptly locked it with a small, silver padlock taken from his pocket. The entire time, he never once broke his intense eye contact with me. That entire night, I couldn't manage to sleep. Every single memory I had ever created of Logan replayed repeatedly in my mind, now grotesquely distorted by the reality of what I'd just seen. The peculiar way he would randomly disappear from the town for many hours. The multiple times he had accidentally shown up exactly where I was previously hanging out. The consistent way he always seemed to want to know the whereabouts of my immediate family. It all suddenly and horribly clicked together in the worst imaginable way. I told myself I absolutely needed more concrete proof before I proceeded to contact the police. I couldn't simply accuse my longtime best friend of being a dangerous predator without some tangible, solid evidence. So, I immediately started intensely following him around. For a full week, I carefully maintained my distance, covertly tracking every single place he went. I observed him parking his truck outside random houses late during the night, and just remaining seated there watching, sometimes for several hours. The last night I shadowed him closely. I desperately wish I hadn't gone. He drove his truck far out past the old grain silos again, this time pulling up and parking near that identical rundown property from our earlier encounter. He got out, opened the rear trunk compartment, and visibly dragged something heavy out. A very large, military-style duffel bag that looked way too heavy to merely contain clothes or camping gear. He struggled to haul the bag into the abandoned house, and even from my remote vantage point on the road, I could have sworn I saw the bag violently move. I called 911 immediately right then. I told them every detail. But by the crucial time the police officially got there, the house was completely vacant. The overwhelming metallic odor inside was enough to cause the responding officers to momentarily gag, smelling strongly like old, stale blood. But there was absolutely no one present and no duffel bag. Logan never returned to his own residence after that horrifying night. His truck was gone entirely, his mobile phone permanently disconnected. The police formally took my detailed statement, but without any concrete evidence. It felt completely as if they were simply waiting for something else to happen. It's now been 8 months. I haven't heard a single word from him, but sometimes I experience this sudden, overwhelming feeling when I'm isolated at home, like someone is actively watching me from the dark outside. Last week, I discovered a thin envelope firmly wedged under my front door. There was no written note, just a single photograph of me deeply asleep in my own bed. The camera angle was unmistakably taken from inside my own room. I was unable to sleep a single wink that night. I sat fixedly on the couch with every single light in the house on, gripping a large kitchen knife as if it could actually stop him and prevent his entry if he definitively chose to come in. I obsessively kept replaying every single second of our entire friendship, morbidly wondering how many times I'd literally been mere inches away from discovering the truth without ever consciously knowing it. How many times had he already been out there silently standing just beyond my closed window? At around 3 o'clock in the morning, my phone suddenly buzzed with a notification. It was an unknown number displayed. I almost allowed the call to immediately go to voicemail, but some primitive part of me desperately needed to hear his voice. Still searching for that missing socket wrench. Logan's voice was disturbingly calm, almost playfully amused. "You were inside my garage for a very long duration, man. I believe you actually discovered something entirely different." I made no attempt to answer him. My entire hand was slick with nervous sweat, gripping the phone device like it was the only thing capable of anchoring me. "I'm not angry," he calmly continued. "Honestly, I'm quite impressed by your actions. You managed to last significantly longer than most people typically do." Then a sharp click. I immediately contacted the police again, but all they could effectively do was formally take another report and strongly suggest I urgently stay somewhere temporarily safe, as if any such sanctuary truly existed anymore. For the next 7 days, I stayed nervously at a coworker's apartment located on the opposite side of town. The change of location helped only slightly until the third night there, when we returned home from quickly grabbing takeout food and discovered the door left fully unlocked. My friend vehemently swore he had securely locked it upon departure. Nothing of value was visibly missing, but I suddenly noticed something strange on the coffee table that absolutely hadn't been present there before our departure. A small, silver socket wrench. That was the shocking moment I finally knew for certain he wasn't just casually watching me. He was actively, deliberately playing games with me. I subsequently moved into a cheap roadside motel unit after that terrifying discovery. I quickly changed motel locations twice more. Each time I would meticulously check every single lock at least twice before attempting to sleep. But then I began finding small, tiny things that clearly didn't belong inside the room. A single, used toothpick resting on the bathroom counter. A precisely folded grocery receipt placed inside the nightstand drawer. A copper penny placed perfectly in the exact middle of the pillow. He was systematically letting me know he'd consistently been there inside my room, and I was utterly powerless to stop the invasion. The final breaking point came exactly 2 weeks ago. I was slowly pulling my car into the latest motel parking lot when my headlights briefly illuminated the far end of the large lot. There he stood, clearly visible, Logan, leaning casually against a sturdy lamppost, his hoodie raised, his arms tightly crossed, just silently observing me. I instantly froze behind the wheel. He did not move a muscle. He didn't even need to move. The chilling message was brutally clear. I could visibly see him, which meant he deliberately wanted to be fully seen. I did not step out of the car. I drove continuously until the sunrise, stopping only when my fuel tank was almost completely empty. But when I finally walked back inside my room the following morning, there was a small, white note underneath the TV remote control. 4 haunting words written in his unmistakable handwriting. Lot number 150. Soon. That's the moment the full horror finally hit me entirely. This intense pursuit wasn't just entirely personal. The photos, the constant watching, they were all integral parts of something unimaginably bigger. The exact same terrifying methodology those numbered tapes utilized in that other chilling story I'd heard vaguely whispered about. He was definitively marking me as his next target. Now every faint creak emanating from the wall sounds exactly like a footstep. Every single shadow visible outside the window could potentially be him waiting. I've completely stopped contacting the police authorities, All they ever manage to do is arrive long after he's already gone. I've completely stopped informing my trusted friends where I'm currently staying overnight. The fewer people who possess the knowledge, the safer I feel. But I know I can't effectively run forever. I strongly believe he's simply allowing me to completely tire myself out, gradually wearing down my physical and mental resistance until the specific night he decisively determines it's time to make his final move. And when that inevitable night arrives, I won't see him initially lurking in the distant shadows. I'll simply wake up, and he'll be physically present there, sitting silently at the foot of my bed, exhibiting that familiar, unsettling smile he used to give when we were children. And then I'll finally and fully comprehend the true, dreadful meaning of lot number 150.